делать узурпацией власти. Но теперь появился аналогичный документ США.
Russian President Vladimir Putin stated on Friday that nearly 700,000 Russian soldiers are currently fighting in Ukraine, as he outlined his strategy to push the front line in the Kharkiv region further away from Russian cities along the border.
Our units were indeed stationed in Kyiv. The military and the security bloc had different proposals on options for our possible further actions. But there was no political decision to storm the city of 3 million, no matter what anyone said. In essence, it was nothing other than an operation to force the Ukrainian regime to peace. The troops were there to push the Ukrainian side to negotiate, to try and find an acceptable solution.
Speaking with Russian soldiers enrolled in a development program, Putin justified the offensive in the Kharkiv region, emphasizing the need to protect Belgorod and other border cities from Ukrainian shelling.
A foreign colleague asked for clarification back then. He is a professional person. We must give him credit. Would our Russian troops remain in the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions? And what would happen to these regions after achieving the goals of special military operation? I replied that, in general, I do not rule out maintaining Ukrainian sovereignty over these territories, however, on the condition that Russia has a strong land connection with Crimea. That is, Kyiv had to give a guarantee of the so-called easement, a legally formalized right of Russia to access the Crimean Peninsula through the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions.
Putin warned that continued strikes on Russian cities would prompt him to consider countermeasures to secure our populated areas. In Friday's hostilities, Russian defenses shot down 87 Ukrainian drones, the Defense Ministry in Moscow reported. Most of these drones were launched against the Rostov region, home to Russia's Southern Military Command. No casualties or damage were reported, marking one of the largest Ukrainian drone barrages of the war. In Russia's Belgorod region, a part of a residential building in Shebekino collapsed due to Ukrainian shelling, injuring 3 people, according to Belgorod Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov. Putin reiterated that Russian forces never intended to storm Kyiv, despite approaching the city early in the conflict. These remarks coincided with the Group of 7 G7 summit in Italy and a separate summit in Switzerland aimed at discussing steps toward peace in Ukraine. Notably, Russia was not invited to the Swiss summit.
What the organizers of the meeting in Switzerland are proposing is just another ploy to divert everyone's attention, reverse the cause and effect of the Ukrainian crisis, set the discussion on the wrong track.
Amid these developments, the US and Ukraine signed a 10-year security agreement, a move hailed as a milestone in bilateral relations, but denounced by Russian officials, including Putin, as null and void. After Ukrainian forces thwarted a Russian drive to Kyiv in early 2022, the conflict has largely focused on the south and east of Ukraine. Russia has annexed regions in these areas, although it does not fully control them. Putin emphasized that his ceasefire proposal aims at a final resolution of the conflict rather than freezing it. He stressed the Kremlin's readiness to start negotiations without delay, provided that Ukraine recognizes Crimea as part of Russia, maintains a non-nuclear status, restricts its military force, and protects the interests of the Russian-speaking population.
I will emphasize the main essence of our proposal is not in any temporary truce or ceasefire, as is, for example, the way the West wants it is to restore losses, rearm the Kyiv regime, and prepare it for a new offensive. I repeat, I'm not talking about freezing the conflict, but about its final resolution.
Putin's remarks outlined his conditions for ending the war, reiterating previous demands that Kyiv recognize Russia's territorial gains and abandon its bid to join NATO. He insisted that Ukraine withdraw from all 4 annexed regions entirely.
Of course, the rights, freedoms, and interests of Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine must be fully ensured. The new territorial realities, the status of Crimea, Sevastopol, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions as subjects of the Russian Federation must be recognized. In the future, all these basic and fundamental provisions should be recorded in the form of fundamental international agreements. Naturally, this also envisages lifting all Western sanctions against Russia.
In Zaporizhzhia, Russia still does not control the region's namesake administrative capital, and in Kherson, Moscow withdrew from the largest city in November 2022. Throughout the conflict, the Kremlin has repeatedly expressed readiness for peace talks and blamed the West for undermining efforts to end the war. Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni on Saturday dismissed a ceasefire offer for Ukraine by Russian President Vladimir Putin as propaganda, as she wrapped up a Group of 7 summit that saw a deal reached for a $50 billion loan to Ukraine.
You know better than me that Russia has unilaterally annexed 4 Ukrainian regions after many months that Russia is not controlling those regions in their entirety. Therefore, if President Putin's proposal is, we are willing to have a peace negotiation if Ukraine recognizes the invasion of Ukraine and gives up the occupied parts, doesn't seem particularly effective to me as a proposal. The one of telling Ukraine to withdraw from Ukraine. I read it like this, and it seems to me more a propaganda initiative.
The loan will be provided by the US, UK, Canada, and possibly Japan, Meloni said.